Welcome back. So, our first port of call this morning is River State. The dust certainly hasn't settled, with many groups coming up with demands for the resignation of the sole administrator, saying that the declaration of the state of emergency is unconstitutional. And of course, the governor also having to deny that he is, encouraging pipeline vandalism in River State. And all those videos on social media are certainly false, and he has nothing to do with it. So which way forward, we ask yet again for River State. Let's have this conversation. And joining us is Professor Iyala Dodd Peterside, is a professor of pediatrics and neonatology at the Perelman School of Medicine, University of Pennsylvania, senior attending neonatologist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, United States, and visiting professor, Guangzhou Women and Children's Medical Center, China, 2019 to present. And he's speaking today as a concerned citizen of River State in diaspora. He joins us virtually from the United States of America. Thank you so much, Professor, for coming through on the program today. So the natural place to start would be as you watched events unfold in River State, and which culminated in the March 18 declaration of a state of emergency and suspension of the governor and the state assembly members. What were your reflections? What went through your mind, Professor?
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, caller. I think that for every Nigerian in the diaspora, no matter the reason we leave Nigeria, we're always looking for good news coming from Nigeria, and we're always proud when good things happen in Nigeria. On the corollary, obviously, when bad things happen, we feel disappointed, embarrassed, and in this particular case, we feel first embarrassed that our government has deteriorated to this point where the constitution doesn't mean anything again. But also we transition to anger because it seems to us that the three arms of government that should be checking each other have almost, as if we have formed a triumvirate of or a gang to assault the constitution because the judiciary, the presidency, and the House of Assembly have, in this sequence of events, just been running roughshod over the constitution. So I think that is the feeling of most Nigerians in diaspora, no matter what their political inkling is that this is disgraceful, and we live in a society here where the constitution is supreme, and if the three arms of government don't protect the constitution, then we're lost.
So what would you consider to be, perhaps we should toe this line of thought. Many actions are being taken, and one that comes to mind immediately is the decision to head to the ECOWAS court by the Ijaw Youth Council, I believe. And some of the points that they are raising in their petition before the ECOWAS Community Court is the matter of self-determination, that their right to self-determination as a people have been infringed upon, and the credentials of the executive suspending the a democratically elected arm of government is called to question as an elected arm of government itself, and they're also challenging the right of the executive to suspend another arm of government. What would you consider to be the possibilities of the outcome of this case, going by the precedent of similar cases that have been before the ECOWAS court?
I think that the very fact that the Ijaw Youth Council found it necessary to go to a ECOWAS court is really an indictment of our local courts, because obviously they don't believe that our local courts will give us justice. Otherwise, why go that far? And the fact of the matter is that the ECOWAS court, no matter the judgment they reach, has very little enforcement powers in Nigeria over the president or whoever else is in charge of Nigeria. So I think, yes, it's symbolic. Yes, it's nice to have people outside uh, hear the case and hopefully give a verdict that is uh, sympathetic to, to the IYC cause. But I think the more pressing need is for our own courts to stand up to power and to make the right calls and right decisions, so that when things go wrong, we have at least one arm of government that we can depend on to call the game as they see it, rather than favor one party over another.
So perhaps their decision to head to court is evidence of, the distrust of uh, much of the citizenry for the judicial arm of government. Don't you think? And whatever the outcome, let's suppose that the outcome of the ECOWAS court favors indeed the petitioners, or it doesn't favor the petitioner, so to speak. What do you think would be the precedent, for the value of democratic development on the African continent, and particularly for Nigeria?
The famous American president said once that if you do not resolve issues peacefully, then uh, protest or violent protest become the options here. And I think we have a very volatile situation in our hands. And you have had the ramblings of some people in the riverine area, the Niger Delta, young men, I'm not sure they are well advised, threatening fire and brimstone. I don't encourage it. I don't know that the um, governor of River State, Sim himself, encourages it. But when you do not do the right thing, then you leave people desperate, and how they react to the assault becomes a matter of judgment. I would hope that one, the ECOWAS court, but more importantly, the suits that have been tabled before the Nigerian courts can get to this very, very quickly, because obviously the National Assembly is not doing anything. The presidency is not showing any response to the protests and opinions of Nigerians. So I'm hoping that somebody in the courts will develop some spine and tell the president and the National Assembly not only that the declaration of emergency rule in River State was unconstitutional, but the shambolic stamping of that declaration by both the House of Rep and the Senate are unacceptable at any level. I think that the beauty of democracy is that it's a government of the people by the people, but it's also based on structures that stand when challenged, and it's also based on people doing the right thing. Because if you have a democracy where either arm of the government cannot be trusted to do the right thing,
Right.
then really you don't have democracy, and then people take laws into their hands.
Well, I want us to step back a bit, not a bit, a lot actually, and go maybe to the very beginning. This started off with two men, perhaps sitting together in a room or somewhere, having some sort of agreement or otherwise. Very close men, actually. They worked together, or at least one worked under the other. I'm talking about the current governor working under former governor, now FCT minister. So perhaps they had some sort of agreement, maybe gentleman agreement, political agreement, what have you. But they were very close. I mean, very close. One knew the ins and outs of the government's finances and all of that. So you can imagine how close they were. And now this has generated, or degenerated rather, into a full-blown war. And we're dealing with a state of emergency. But I always like to go back to that point, because I think it can give us some sort of reflection and just really think about it, that this is just a war in some sense between two people who God knows why they fell apart. But I want to ask you, in terms of the handling now of this by political leaders in general in Rivers State, and I want to say all of them, are you proud of the way they have handled it?
No, not by any measure. First of all, I'm happy we went all that far back, because the president's speech pretended that the problem was between Sim Fubara and the House of Assembly, and that's really a dishonest presentation. The problem is between Sim and the Federal Capital Territory Minister, and the House of Assembly members take orders from the Federal Capital Minister. So that's where that started, and he cannot pretend that he doesn't know that,
Well,
because the
Prof,
initial
the assembly
piece.
members have said time and again that they don't take orders from him. But I totally understand where you're coming from. But they have said, we've asked him, but he said no,
Yeah,
he doesn't have a hand in this.
that's fine. They can say whatever they like. But if you recall, the move to impeach the governor occurred within 6 months of taking over power, and that move, if you see the articles of or the letter for impeachment, had no specifics in it, and there is a clear belief in Rivers State that that move was made on the instruction of somebody. And since then, if you follow the actions of the assembly, they have acted like they were either waiting for instructions or listening to instructions, or and unfortunately, they've also made a lot of mistakes because the instructions have not been as clear as they thought. For instance, their defection, I think, was based on some notion that everybody was going to move, and then the minister did not move or something like that, and therefore they pulled back their defection. So I think the problem is that godfatherism is not new in politics, whether in America or in Nigeria. The question is, how much control does the godfather want? And if the godfather wants too much control, it's natural that the person who is bearing the burden at some point will say, give me a leeway, give me a little leeway so that I can do what I can do and make a name for myself. And I think that's where all of this started. I don't know all the details, but I think it seems to me that these two people, like you said, are mercurial candidates, and they locked head, and the governor said, look, give me a little leeway. The other guy says, no, you promised you're going to do this, obey me, be loyal completely. And now the fight starts. And we can't
all right,
lose
Prof.
sight of that. That's where we need to, as Nigerians, also say, look, yes, you help somebody become a governor. You do not have to micromanage him. If you don't think he's fit to be governor, do not help him be governor. But when he becomes governor, we are going to judge him by his actions and his productivity. So it's up to us to defend that mandate if truly that mandate was clear.
All right, Prof. I guess that we may never know what the agreement was, because when it comes to such political agreements, I don't think it's going to be helpful to any of them to let us know. We may never know. Even if they resolve politically, the true agreement, we may never know. What we can speak to is what the law says and what we can speak over and have our opinion on. And so there's a scenario already in place. The state of emergency has been declared. The governor and the House members have been suspended. What do you think will be the interpretation in terms of our democracy if this is sustained for 6 months? Because there is an amendment to the Gazette that says if things get better, it can be less than that. But what do you think will happen? What would that do to us as a people if we allow this to get to 6 months?
Let me say this to start. Let me ask you a question. You think if Bola Tinubu was governor of Lagos State, Obasanjo did what he did, that Bola Tinubu will leave the government house? No. He's an astute politician. He will drag 10 SANs to court and block it, and I think, quite frankly, refuse to obey an unconstitutional rule. Unfortunately, Sim is a peaceful man and really, honestly, was not a politician in the true sense. But he could have said, no, this is unconstitutional, go to court. But I think, again, with our courts being so jaundiced, it's impossible to know what they will do, because clearly there's nowhere in the Constitution that allows the president to suspend an elected governor. In fact, the Supreme Court has stopped governors from suspending local government council chairmen. So how can that same constitution support suspension of a governor? There's nowhere in our constitution where an administrator, civilian or military, is written. So where is the president manufacturing all these rules and laws that he's acting upon? And the two houses of the chamber that should have called to order and asked more questions just completely botched the process of, making sure the president was in line with the Constitution. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. And I think that, quite honestly, it should not stand. Unfortunately, except the courts develop some swine, like I said before, we're stuck here with the benevolence of the president deciding when to end this.
So let me, Prof. So let me put forward some of their arguments that which is not directly in the Constitution per se, but that is the logic behind it. If you look at Section 305, I think it's 3 or D or C, I've forgotten the exact point now, that talks about you don't necessarily need to wait for a crisis to fester. You can do something to avert it. That's on one hand. So that is their counter argument to people who say shouldn't have declared a state of emergency. They feel like 2 oil pipelines blown up and threats to that effect is enough for us to say, let's not allow it to get to 50. That's one hand. Second is the persons involved. The dramatis personae here are the governor and the House of Assembly, at least the frontliners. We can talk about Nyesom Wike as a back end, if you will, but the frontliners. So it felt like, how do you want me to manage the situation when the people that should solve the problem are the problems themselves? I'd like you to respond to that logic of theirs.
I think that when you start passing the Constitution to suit a fait accompli, that's dangerous. First of all, the responsibility of the governor does not extend to protecting the pipelines. That's a federal responsibility. In fact, it's the presidential responsibility to do that. So to use the inability of the presidency to protect the pipelines as an excuse for it's pure. The second thing is it was within 24 hours of the bombs. So there was one bomb. In fact, I understand one of the companies said there was no bomb. So really, there was only one bomb. It was within 24 hours of the bombing that the state of emergency was declared. If they truly thought that this was a process that was starting, one, they should have had some investigation to decide who actually bombed the pipelines. In America, they say follow the money. Who benefits from a state of emergency? The third thing is what support or discussion was had with the governor to say what are you going to do about these bombings before you say you are no longer competent enough to take over to control your state that you were elected to control. In the Niger Delta, there periodically bombs go up every time pipelines are breached. So every time a pipeline is breached, you will declare a state of emergency. You can actually declare a state of emergency without removing the governor and send support to him to counter whatever security risk you thought was in place or was coming up. You don't have to remove the person in government. There's no provision for that. Your job, if you see a fire burning, you can provide additional support to the governor to put out the fires, not take him out of office. That's nowhere in a constitutional republic and a federal republic for that matter. That should not be accepted. That's the dictatorial rule.
And that's where the president's aide disagrees, saying that this would have degenerated further into violence had the president not acted because of the continuing standoff between the governor and the state assembly members. But of course, it's a continuing conversation, and we must anchor at this point.
Nobody's arguing about the president not acting. What we are saying is what action should he have taken? He took the unconstitutional action. We are not saying if you think there's a threat to our republic, don't institute an action. We're saying do not institute an unconstitutional action, and that's what he has done.
And that's why we must anchor at this point. Thank you so much for joining us on this segment. We've been talking with Professor Yala Dodd Peterside, a professor of pediatrics and neonatology at the Perelman School of Medicine, University of Pennsylvania. Thank you very much for your time on this particular segment.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So we're not done yet with conversations that are currently at the center of public discourse. This time around, we'll be headed next to that very worrying Senate hearing on the sexual harassment allegations. So we'll be speaking with an activist. So stay with us. We'll be right back.